It began with the crunch of boots on gravel, not the casual shuffle of a hiker or a neighbor out for a walk, but that sharp, intentional sound that feels out of place in the mountains at 8 in the morning. Each step was heavy, paced, like whoever was walking wanted their presence announced. I was sitting on my porch with a mug of bitter black coffee, watching the fog peel itself off the pine trees, feeling smugly satisfied that I'd finally escaped the chaos of suburban living when I looked up and saw them. 4 thick-set men in black polo shirts, bargain bin tactical pants, mirrored sunglasses despite the sun barely peeking over the ridgeline. Across their chests, stitched unevenly like it came straight from a discount embroidery shop, were the words community enforcement. And trailing behind them, heels clicking against the gravel with an attitude that suggested she owned the entire mountain, was her. Let's call her Mara. Mara wore a fire engine red blazer, the kind of red that screams authority even when it's completely undeserved, and she gripped a clipboard so tightly it looked less like paperwork and more like a blunt instrument. Her lips were tight, her smile razor-thin, and her eyes swept over my cabin the way a hawk surveys a field before striking. One of the men stepped forward, puffed out his chest, and barked, "Open the gate. We have authority here. Authority on my land." I almost sprayed coffee across my porch railing. Mara didn't wait for an answer. She launched straight into a tirade about violations, illegal construction, unauthorized occupancy, tossing around legal-sounding words she clearly enjoyed saying far more than understanding. According to her, my cabin was a nuisance, my presence was unacceptable, and somehow I was trespassing on property I legally owned. It was so ridiculous I nearly laughed. Nearly, because beneath the absurdity was something colder, something deliberate. Intimidation. Carefully planned intimidation. And the ironic part was that Mara had been building toward this moment for months. When I bought this cabin up in the hills, it felt like winning the lottery without even buying a ticket. No HOA notices taped to my door. No passive-aggressive emails about trash cans facing the wrong direction. No fines for parking my own truck in my own driveway. Just trees, birds, a groaning old porch, and the sharp smell of pine in the morning air. The place wasn't fancy. An aging log frame, a stone chimney that needed repairs, porch boards that complained loudly under every step. But it was mine. The closest neighbors lived half a mile down the ridge, and the only rules that mattered were the ones nature enforced. Cut your own firewood. Don't burn the forest down. Keep to yourself. Mara despised that. She lived just past a bend in the road in what I can only describe as a shrine to bad taste. A massive concrete-heavy house slapped on a land that used to be forest. All sharp angles and louder entitlement. Every time I drove past, she'd stand near her mailbox like it was a guard tower, arms crossed, staring at me as though my existence personally insulted her. In her mind, the problem was painfully simple. My cabin wasn't part of her HOA, and that single fact drove her completely insane. It started small, like these situations always do. A handwritten note shoved under my gate complaining about unpainted fence posts being non-compliant. A report claiming the sound of my chainsaw was disrupting community ambience. Then came the official letters, neatly printed on thick paper with an HOA logo plastered across the top, demanding dues for an organization I had never joined. I burned those letters in my wood stove. That's when Mara escalated. People like her never stop. When you ignore them, they see silence as defiance, and defiance to someone obsessed with control is unforgivable. That morning, before the boots, the trucks, and the fake badges, everything had been perfect. Bacon crackling in a cast-iron skillet. Cold mountain air drifting through the open window. My cousins were staying with me, both former Army, both built like men you don't challenge twice. They were still asleep after a long night of cards and whiskey, and I assumed the day would be quiet. Maybe split some firewood. Maybe head into town. Then the engines arrived. Not Harleys. Not that deep, confident rumble you feel in your chest. These were rough, uneven pickup trucks with rattling exhausts. 3 of them pulled up at the end of my gravel drive, like they were about to serve a warrant. Doors flew open. The black polo crew poured out, cracking knuckles, adjusting belts, doing that exaggerated routine insecure men use when they want to look dangerous. Mara followed behind, heels wobbling slightly on the loose stones, clipboard raised like a badge of office. This property is now under community authority, one of the men shouted, shaking my gate for emphasis. I leaned against the porch post and took another slow sip of coffee. This isn't your jurisdiction, I called back calmly. And you're trespassing. Mara stepped forward, stabbing a finger through the bars of the gate. You don't get to decide that. Your structure violates community bylaws. We've received multiple complaints. From who? I asked. The squirrels. That joke didn't land. One of the men leaned closer, dropping his voice into a rehearsed growl. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Behind him, Mara smiled like she just unleashed her personal army. That was the moment it stopped being amusing. I set my mug down slowly, careful not to spill a drop. You don't have a warrant. You don't have legal authority. And unless one of you plans on mowing my grass while you're here, I suggest you get off my driveway. Mara snapped. Her voice jumped an octave, sharp and shrill. I'll have you removed. This cabin is illegal. My security team has a right to enforce compliance. She actually said, my security team. The men shifted, confidence cracking but not gone, spreading out to block the road, flexing and posturing, committing to their roles. One leaned against his truck, like he was auditioning for an action movie. Another rattled the gate again, harder this time. Inside the cabin, I heard floorboards creak as my cousin started waking up. I stayed right where I was, leaning on the railing, heart steady, voice calm, because deep down I knew something Mara didn't. She thought she was in control, and she had no idea what kind of storm was already rolling in. All right, I need to pause the story here for just a moment, because what Mara was doing on my driveway wasn't just obnoxious behavior. It followed a very specific pattern I've seen play out again and again. Once you recognize it, a lot of HOA horror stories suddenly start making sense. By standard rules, a legitimate homeowners association has exactly zero authority outside the boundaries laid out in its governing documents. No imaginary community zones. No verbal power grabs. No clipboard-powered expansions. If your property isn't officially recorded as part of an HOA, they can't touch you, they can't fine you, they can't enforce rules, and they absolutely can't send hired muscle to your gate. Anything beyond a certified letter crosses the line into harassment very quickly. From a legal standpoint, what Mara tried to pull that morning wandered straight into dangerous territory, blocking access to a private driveway, threatening forced removal without a court order, and impersonating some kind of enforcement authority. Those aren't HOA tactics. Those are liability grenades with the pins already pulled. The second she brought paid security onto land she didn't own, she stopped playing petty neighborhood politics and started gambling with serious civil and criminal consequences. But here's the part most people overlook, and this is where psychology matters. This wasn't really about rules. It was a psychological trap. People like Mara don't enforce bylaws. They enforce identity. Her entire sense of self was built around control, hierarchy, and obedience. My cabin was a crack in that fantasy. Proof that someone could live outside her system and still thrive. So she escalated, not because any rule book demanded it, but because her ego couldn't tolerate it. Intimidation is always their favorite shortcut. Raise your voice. Wear uniforms. Throw around threats. Hope fear kicks in before logic has time to show up. Most of the time, it works because most people panic. The mistake Mara made, and it was a massive one, was assuming everyone panics. I didn't, and neither did the people she was about to meet. The first thing I noticed was the silence, not the peaceful kind, not the mountain quiet filled with birds and wind and trees breathing. This was a tight, brittle silence that settles in right before something breaks. The kind where everyone is pretending they're still in control, even though they can feel it slipping through their fingers. Mara was still shouting, her clipboard slicing the air as if swinging hard enough might magically give authority. Her security team spread themselves across my gate, blocking the drive, boots planted wide, arms folded, chests puffed out. It was all theater, cheap, overacted, and loud. Then the ground vibrated. At first it was so faint, I thought it might just be the wind rolling through the valley. A low hum, distant, almost polite. One of the guys tilted his head, like he'd heard something he didn't want to acknowledge. Then it came again, deeper this time, louder, A rolling sound that didn't fade or scatter, just kept coming, steady and intentional, like a heartbeat fueled by horsepower. Mara froze mid-rant. "What is that?" one of the men muttered. I didn't answer. I leaned against the porch railing and let a slow grin spread across my face. My cousin stepped out behind me. First came Cal, 6'4", shoulders like a barn door, still wearing the same faded army shirt he'd slept in. Then Reed, shorter but broader, built like a wrecking ball that learned how to walk upright. They took in the scene in seconds. The trucks, the gate, Mara vibrating with fury. Then they heard it too. Cal smiled, slow and knowing. "Sounds like the boys are early," he said. Mara spun toward him. "This is private enforcement business. You need to stay out of it." Reed laughed, low and deep, the kind of sound that carried farther than her shouting ever could. "Ma'am, you brought this front porch. That makes it everybody's business." The rumble grew louder, rolling over the ridge now, no longer subtle. You could feel it in your chest. Dust shifted on the road. One of the security guys took an unconscious step back, then caught himself, clearly embarrassed. "That better not be motorcycles." Mara snapped, like she could order reality into compliance. It was motorcycles. A dozen of them. They crested the hill in formation, black and chrome slicing to the morning light. The engines were synchronized so perfectly it sounded less like traffic and more like a drum line. Leather vests, military patches. Discipline. No revving for attention. No wild weaving. Just control. Suddenly the pickup trucks looked very small. The riders rolled in and fanned out across the road with quiet precision, engines idling as dust swirled around them like a curtain. Kickstands dropped almost in unison. Helmets came off. These weren't rowdy bikers looking for trouble. These were men who had learned how to move together when things mattered. The shift was instant. One of the security guys whispered, "Oh, hell no." Mara tried to regain control. "Do not let them intimidate you," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "This is an HOA matter." No one moved. The leader of the riders stepped forward. Let's call him Drew. Mid-40s, weathered face, eyes calm in that way that only comes from surviving things you don't talk about. He looked past Mara, past the uniforms, and straight at me. "You good?" he asked. "Never better," I said. That was all he needed. Mara stormed toward the gate again, clipboard trembling in her grip. "You are all trespassing. I will call the sheriff. You'll be arrested." Drew glanced at her, then at the gate, then at the invisible property lines he didn't need to see to understand. "Ma'am," he said calmly, his voice level and steady, "you're the one standing on land you don't own." Her face twisted like the words physically hurt her. "This land falls under community oversight." The riders laughed. Not loud, not mocking, just a low, rolling sound that carried weight. Reed leaned forward slightly. "You keep saying that like repetition makes it true." Mara spun back toward her security team, desperation finally leaking through the cracks. "Block the driveway. Don't let them advance." No one moved. One guy adjusted his sunglasses with hands that were visibly shaking. Another glanced back at his truck, like it might suddenly grow wings and carry him away. The leader of the security crew cleared his throat. Maybe we should reassess." Mara snapped around on him. "I am giving you a direct order." Drew took one step forward. Just one. Boots crunching on gravel. Slow and deliberate. "You might want to listen to your guy," he said quietly. "He's the only one here thinking straight." That was the breaking point. The first security guard cracked. He muttered something about not being paid enough for this and walked back to his truck. Another followed. Then another. Like dominoes, confidence collapsing in real time. Mara's voice shot higher. "Cowards. All of you." The motorcycle engines came to life again. Not aggressive. Not charging. Just enough to remind everyone what controlled power actually sounded like. Within seconds, the trucks peeled away, tires kicking up dust as they fled down the mountain road, leaving Mara standing alone in the cloud they created. She stood there, red blazer now coated in dirt, clipboard hanging uselessly at her side, breathing hard. The valley settled back into quiet, broken only by the soft ticking of cooling engines. I lifted my coffee mug in a small salute. "Looks like your army clocked out." She stared at me like she wanted to say something, anything, but nothing came. Her authority had evaporated, stripped bare for what it really was. Noise. Drew stepped closer, not threatening, just present. "Go home," he said. "You've embarrassed yourself enough." For a moment, I thought she might scream again. Instead, she spun on her heel, stumbled once on the gravel, then marched back to her SUV and drove off without another word. The rider stayed a few minutes longer, laughter breaking out now that the tension was gone. Cal clapped Drew on the shoulder. Reed shook his head, smiling. "Clipboard Queen picked the wrong hill," Reed said. I took a deep breath, the kind you don't realize you're holding until it's finally over. The storm had passed, and Mara had just learned a lesson she wasn't ready for but desperately needed. The valley didn't snap back to normal right away after her SUV disappeared around the bend, leaving behind nothing but dust and the faint smell of burnt gasoline. There was a strange quiet hanging in the air, not victory, silence, not exactly relief. More like the land itself exhaled and said, "Well, that was unnecessary." The bikes idled a while longer, ticking as they cooled. Riders laughed low and easy now, trading looks that said they'd seen worse mornings than this. Eventually, they mounted up one by one. Engines rolled back to life, not as a warning this time, but as punctuation. Then they were gone too, the sound fading into the hills until it was just me, my porch, and a coffee mug that had gone cold without me noticing. 2 days later, Mara made one last move. I found the envelope in my mailbox. Pristine white, bold HOA logo stamped on the front, like it still carried power. Inside was a notice of violation, excessive noise, disturbing community ambience, a fine, so ridiculous I laughed out loud at my kitchen table. I didn't pay it. I framed it, hung it right above the fireplace. And that's where this stops being just a story about one woman with a clipboard and becomes something bigger. The lesson here isn't HOAs are evil, or bikers solve everything, or even stand your ground and intimidate harder. That's a shallow takeaway, and it misses the point entirely. This is about how power actually works. People like Mara rely on something incredibly fragile. They rely on silence, on compliance, on the belief that authority exists just because someone says it does. Most of the time, they don't need to be right. They just need you to back down before anyone questions them. That's why intimidation is always their first move. From a legal standpoint, standing your ground doesn't mean yelling louder. It means knowing where you stand, literally and figuratively. Knowing your deed, knowing your boundaries, knowing when someone is bluffing, and hoping you won't call it. From a psychological standpoint, the moment you stay calm while someone else escalates, the script flips. Suddenly they're exposed. Their anger looks childish. Their threats sound hollow. And everyone watching, neighbors, bystanders, even their own hired help, starts to see it too. And make no mistake, there is always an audience. That's the part people underestimate. When Mara tried to pull rank on my driveway, she wasn't just confronting me. She was performing for herself, for her self-image, for a role she desperately needed to believe in. The moment that performance collapsed, the moment no one played along anymore, her authority vanished. She didn't lose because she was shouted down. She lost because she was revealed. Neighbors have stopped by since then, some with casseroles, some with firewood, some just to shake my hand and say, "Thanks." Not because I'm special, but because watching someone stand calmly gave them permission to stop being afraid. That's how bullies lose. Not all at once, but crack by crack. If you're dealing with an HOA nightmare, an overreaching boss, or a neighbor who thinks control equals respect, here's what I'll tell you. Like an older brother sitting across the table from you. Slow down. Breathe. Learn the rules better than they do. Document everything. Don't let their urgency turn into your panic. And remember, confidence doesn't have to be loud to be unshakable. You don't need an army. You need clarity. Because once someone realizes their power only exists as long as you believe in it, they tend to unravel on their own. Mara didn't stop being Mara after that day. People like her rarely do. But she learned something important, even if she'd never admit out loud. Her HOA empire ended where my land began. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with someone who tried to bully you with rules, titles, or fake authority? Did you stand your ground? Or did it take time to realize you could? Drop your story in the comments. I read them, and I promise you're not alone. And if you want more stories like this, real experiences mixed with real lessons, hit subscribe. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't yelling back. It's staying calm long enough for the truth to do the work for you.